February 14, 1944. Stalag VIII-B prisoner of war camp, Lamsdorf, Upper Silesia. The air smells of coal smoke and disinfectant. Sister Margaret Bowes unpacks her medical supplies in a converted barracks that will serve as the camp infirmary. At 27, she is one of 3 British Red Cross nurses assigned to care for Allied prisoners. The assignment seemed straightforward during her training in Geneva. Treat injuries, monitor infectious disease, maintain medical records. Standard humanitarian work behind enemy lines. The camp stretches across 40 acres of frozen mud. Watchtowers mark the perimeter. Barbed wire catches the weak winter light. Nearly 20,000 men live here. British, French, Polish, Soviet. Separate compounds for separate nationalities. The German commandant, Oberst Hermann Ostmann, greets the Red Cross delegation with formal courtesy. He speaks perfect English, educated at Oxford before the war. He assures them the camp operates according to Geneva Convention standards. Prisoners receive adequate rations, medical care, and shelter. International inspections have found no violations. Sister Bowes believes him. Why wouldn't she? The Red Cross briefing emphasized German efficiency and adherence to military protocol. POW camps in the West were different from concentration camps in the East. Soldiers were soldiers, even in captivity. Rules existed. Systems functioned. Civilization persisted even in wartime. Her first days confirmed these assumptions. The British compound houses mostly RAF crews shot down over Germany. They're thin but not starving. Tired but not desperate. They joke about terrible German coffee and dream about proper English tea. Some have been here since 1940. They've developed routines. Roll call at dawn. Work details during the day. Evening gatherings in the barracks where they share letters from home and play cards made from Red Cross parcels. The infirmary treats ordinary ailments. Respiratory infections from the cold. Minor injuries from work details. Malnutrition symptoms that improve with vitamin supplements. Sister Bowes keeps meticulous records in a standard medical log. Patient name, complaint, treatment, outcome. Bureaucratic documentation that satisfies Red Cross requirements and German inspection protocols. But there's another compound. The one for Soviet prisoners. It sits on the eastern edge of the camp, separated by additional wire and a 50-meter gap of no man's land. Sister Bowes can see it from the infirmary window. Different rules apply there. No Red Cross parcels. No male privileges. No recreational time. German guards patrol that section with dogs. She hears them sometimes at night. Barking, shouting, sounds she doesn't want to identify. March arrives cold and gray. Sister Bowes requests permission to inspect the Soviet compound's medical facilities. The German camp physician, Dr. Franz Richter, politely refuses. Soviet prisoners receive care from their own medical personnel, he explains. International law doesn't require Western medical staff to treat enemy combatants from the Eastern Front. The Soviets haven't signed certain protocols. Different standards apply. He suggests she focus on British welfare. That's what she's here for, after all. She doesn't push. Not yet. She's still learning the camp's rhythms, still establishing relationships with the German medical staff, still trying to do her job without causing diplomatic incidents. The Red Cross operates on goodwill and cooperation. One complaint from the commandant could end her assignment and jeopardize access for all humanitarian workers. But she sees things. Small details that accumulate slowly. A Soviet work detail marches past the infirmary every morning. 20 men in striped prison uniforms, thinner than the British prisoners, moving with the mechanical exhaustion of people beyond hunger. The count changes week to week. Sometimes 18 men. Sometimes 15. New faces appear. Old ones vanish. No explanation offered. One afternoon in late March, a Soviet prisoner collapses 50 meters from the infirmary. Guards drag him toward the eastern compound. Sister Bowes moves to help, but Dr. Richter stops her. Regulations, he says. Chain of command. The Soviet medical officer will handle it. She watches through the window as they disappear into the compound. The man doesn't return to work the next day. Or the day after. When she asks, Dr. Richter shrugs. Pneumonia, probably. Many Soviets arrive in poor condition. Their own country's fault, really. Stalin doesn't care about prisoners. She wants to believe that explanation. It fits the narrative she's been given. Soviet incompetence. Communist disregard for individual life. Western prisoners receive better treatment because Western nations respect treaties and conventions. It's not about cruelty. It's about reciprocity. Germany treats British prisoners well because Britain treats German prisoners well. The Soviets don't honor such agreements, so their soldiers suffer accordingly. But doubt creeps in. Small observations that don't fit comfortable explanations. The way German guards handle British prisoners versus Soviet ones. Professional firmness versus active contempt. The rations distributed to each compound. Adequate versus subsistence. The work assignments. Reasonable labor versus deliberate exhaustion. None of it violates Geneva Convention rules technically, because those rules don't fully apply to Soviet prisoners. Legal gray zones create space for systematic neglect. April brings warmer weather and worse rumors. British prisoners whisper about things they've seen. Soviet prisoners forced to stand at attention for hours in punishment formations. Men shot for minor infractions. Bodies removed from the eastern compound on carts every few days. The whispers are vague, unverifiable, possibly exaggerated. POW camps breed rumors. Boredom and fear create mythology. Sister Bowes wants to dismiss it as prison gossip. She can't. Not entirely. Because she started keeping a second notebook. Not the official medical log with its sanitized entries and bureaucratic language. A personal journal. Blue fabric cover, about the size of her hand. Pages filled with observations she doesn't record elsewhere. Details that trouble her. Questions she can't ask aloud. She writes in the evenings after the German staff leaves. Small, cramped handwriting. Dates and descriptions. March 28, Soviet work detail down to 14 men. April 2, heard shots from Eastern Compound, 2 a.m. April 7, saw a burial detail carrying 4 wrapped bodies past the camp perimeter. She doesn't know what she's documenting yet. Doesn't know if it matters. But some instinct tells her to preserve these observations. Just in case they become important later. The notebook fits in her uniform pocket. She carries it everywhere. A small act of secret defiance. Or perhaps just insurance against her own memory. POW camps distort perception. Normalize the abnormal. After a few months, you stop noticing things that would have shocked you initially. The notebook preserves her shock. Keeps it alive and sharp and troubling. On April 15, something changes. A Soviet prisoner named Dmitri Volkov appears at the infirmary fence. He shouldn't be there. Soviet prisoners don't leave their compound without guard escort. But somehow he's alone, leaning against the wire in the brief twilight after evening roll call. Sister Bowes is inside organizing medical supplies. She sees him through the window. Thin face, hollow eyes, desperation visible even in the fading light. She goes outside. Dangerous decision. Fraternization with Soviet prisoners is forbidden. But he's clearly ill. Dark stains on his prison uniform. Blood or worse. She approaches the fence slowly, glancing toward the guard towers. Blind spots exist in any security system. This moment exists in one of them. Volkov speaks in broken German. A few words, barely whispered. Witness. Remember. Truth. Then he pulls something from his uniform. A small bundle of papers, folded tight, wrapped in cloth. He pushes it through the fence. Sister Bowes takes it automatically, reflexively. By the time she processes what's happening, Volkov is already retreating into shadows. Within seconds, he's gone. She stands there holding the bundle. Her heart pounds. This is contraband. Evidence of forbidden contact. If discovered, it could end her mission, endanger the entire Red Cross presence in the camp. The smart decision would be to turn it in immediately. Report the incident. Maintain institutional credibility. Protect the mission. She doesn't. She slips the bundle into her pocket next to the notebook. Returns to the infirmary. Waits until she's alone in her quarters after dark. Then she opens it carefully, hands shaking slightly. Inside are 6 pages of thin paper covered in Cyrillic script. She can't read Russian. But there are also crude drawings. Sketches of figures, buildings, scenes of violence. Stick figures hanging from posts. Bodies in ditches. Guards with rifles. Documentation from someone who couldn't write in English but needed to communicate urgently, desperately. Sister Bowes sits on her narrow cot and stares at the papers. She's crossed a line she can't uncross. Possession of these documents implicates her in whatever story they tell. She could still destroy them. Burn them in the small stove that heats her quarters. Pretend the fence meeting never happened. Return to official documentation and proper protocols. But she doesn't. Instead, she carefully copies the drawings into her notebook. Rough sketches, nothing artistic. Just visual records of what Volkov wanted preserved. Then she hides his original papers inside her mattress, beneath the thin government issue cover. Tomorrow she'll find someone who reads Russian. Tomorrow she'll decide what to do with this information. Tonight she just sits in the dark and listens to the camp settle into uneasy sleep. Somewhere in the Soviet compound, Dmitri Volkov is either alive or dead. She'll probably never know which. But he gave her something. Burden or gift, responsibility or curse. Documentation of things she's only suspected. Evidence of a truth she hasn't wanted to acknowledge. The war has been abstract for her until now. Casualty reports and strategic maps and newspaper accounts. Even working in a POW camp, she's been insulated from the worst. Treating cold and hunger and homesickness. Real suffering, but familiar suffering. Recognizable within the framework of military conflict and international law. What Volkov handed her represents something different. Not the legitimate hardship of war but the deliberate cruelty of genocide. Not unfortunate conditions but systematic murder. And she's the only one holding proof. She opens her notebook again. Adds a new entry. April 15, 1944, received documentation from Soviet prisoner. No longer certain what I'm witnessing. No longer certain who would believe me if I knew. The problem has become her problem. The witness has become the witness. And there's no going back. The next morning, Sister Bowes learns that Dmitri Volkov is dead. Pneumonia, according to the German report. Died in the night, buried at dawn in the camp cemetery outside the wire. No autopsy. No investigation. Just another name on a list of Soviet casualties. Natural causes in a place where death has become entirely natural. She knows it's not pneumonia. Knows he was killed because someone saw him at the fence, or suspected what he carried, or simply decided his existence was inconvenient. The papers in her mattress confirm her complicity and his sacrifice. He's dead because he tried to tell the truth. She's alive because she's protected by British citizenship and Red Cross neutrality. The injustice is absolute. She needs to find a Russian translator. Quietly, carefully, without raising suspicion. The British compound includes officers educated at Cambridge and Oxford. One of them, Flight Lieutenant David Preston, studied Slavic languages before the war. Academic interest in Tolstoy and Dostoevsky. He's 42, shot down in 1941, senior-ranking prisoner with access to most areas of the camp. Sister Bowes has treated his recurring bronchitis. They've developed careful trust. She approaches him during morning sick call. Low conversation while she checks his lungs. She has documents. Russian documents. Nothing political, she assures him. Personal letters she needs translated for a medical case. Preston understands immediately what she's really asking. Understands the risk and the implication. He agrees without asking questions she couldn't safely answer. That evening, she slips the papers to him during a routine medical inspection. He returns them 3 days later with handwritten translations on the back of each page. The English text is worse than she imagined. Not vague accusations but specific testimony. Dates, names, methods. Systematic starvation. Forced labor details designed to kill through exhaustion. Punishment formations where men stand at attention for 12 hours in freezing weather. Medical experiments. Deliberate neglect of wounded prisoners. Mass executions disguised as individual deaths from natural causes. Volkov had been a doctor before the war. Trained in Moscow, mobilized in 1941, captured during the disaster at Kiev. He'd worked in a Soviet compound's medical section for 2 years. Watched hundreds of men die from preventable causes. Documented everything in detailed medical notes. Then condensed those notes into 6 pages of testimony meant to survive him and reach the outside world. His final professional act. His attempt at immortality. Sister Bowes copies the translations into her notebook. Then she adds her own observations. Cross-references dates with camp records she has access to. Work detail numbers. Ration distributions. Medical supply requisitions. The official documentation tells a story of bureaucratic efficiency and proper procedure. Her notebook tells a different story. The gap between them is the space where men die invisibly. She begins watching more carefully. Taking mental notes of everything. Soviet work details leave the eastern compound at dawn. She counts heads. Records numbers. Tracks which faces disappear and when. German burial details operate before sunrise, moving wrapped bodies on handcarts to the camp cemetery. She watches from her window in the pre-dawn darkness. Counts those too. The mathematics are brutal and irrefutable. Soviet compound population decreases by approximately 40 men per month. Official German records explain this as natural mortality from pre-existing conditions. Tuberculosis. Typhus. General debilitation from years of poor nutrition. Not the camp's fault. They arrived damaged. The camp merely houses them until they die of causes beyond German control. But Sister Bowes has access to medical supplies. She knows what gets distributed to each compound. British prisoners receive adequate rations, vitamin supplements, basic medications. Soviet prisoners receive nothing. No Red Cross parcels. No medical support beyond minimum maintenance. When they fall sick, they're quarantined and left to die. When they weaken from malnutrition, they're assigned heavier work details that accelerate their decline. The system is designed to kill them slowly and bureaucratically. Death by paperwork. Murder by protocol. She starts documenting systematically. Every morning, she records Soviet work detail numbers. Every evening, she notes any incidents visible from the infirmary. Shots fired. Shouting. Unusual activity in the eastern compound. She cross-references German medical reports with her own observations, finding discrepancies everywhere. A prisoner Dr. Richter claims died of typhus in the infirmary actually died during a punishment formation. Another supposedly succumbed to pneumonia after being shot trying to escape. The lies are casual, confident, routine. Flight Lieutenant Preston becomes her confederate and interpreter. He speaks with Soviet prisoners during rare moments when compounds overlap at work sites. Gathers testimony, transcribes it into English, passes it to Sister Bowes during medical consultations. They're building a case. Evidence of systematic murder disguised as natural deaths. War crimes hidden behind procedural legitimacy. The Germans begin to notice. Not the specifics, but the pattern. Sister Bowes asking too many questions. Requesting access to Soviet medical records. Inquiring about burial procedures. Dr. Richter becomes less friendly, more formal. The commandant suggests she focus on British welfare. That's what she's here for, he reminds her. Gently but firmly. A warning disguised as guidance. She ignores it. Can't stop now. The notebook has become more than documentation. It's evidence. Proof. Testimony for a trial that hasn't happened yet but must happen eventually. Someone needs to remember what happened here. Someone needs to preserve the truth before it disappears into bureaucratic euphemism and post-war amnesia. May 1944. The notebook grows thicker. Pages filled with dates, numbers, names when she can learn them. Descriptions of injuries that don't match official explanations. Testimonies from British prisoners who've witnessed Soviet mistreatment. Everything cross-referenced, verified where possible, marked with question marks where verification isn't available. Professional medical documentation transformed into prosecutorial evidence. She knows she can't take it to German authorities. They're the perpetrators. But Red Cross officials visit occasionally. International inspectors conducting routine checks. She prepares her presentation carefully. Selects the most irrefutable evidence. Witnesses who'll corroborate. Documentation that withstands scrutiny. The Red Cross inspector arrives on May 18, Swiss national, late 50s, career diplomat accustomed to navigating sensitive situations. Sister Bowes requests a private meeting. Professional courtesy between medical personnel. He agrees, expecting routine administrative discussion. She presents the notebook. Opens to key pages. Shows him numbers, testimonies, drawings. Explains what she's witnessed over 3 months. Systematic murder of Soviet prisoners through deliberate neglect and disguised executions. War crimes committed daily, hidden behind Geneva Convention technicalities and bureaucratic language. The inspector listens politely. Takes notes. Thanks her for her diligence. Then explains reality. The Red Cross operates on German permission. Access depends on maintaining cordial relationships with camp authorities. Making accusations would end that access. British and French prisoners would lose medical support and parcel delivery. Thousands would suffer to investigate allegations about Soviets who aren't technically covered by Western humanitarian protocols anyway. He doesn't say she's wrong. Doesn't dispute her documentation. Simply explains that being right doesn't matter when you lack power to act. The Red Cross can't prosecute. Can't enforce. Can barely inspect. Raising these issues would accomplish nothing except ending the organization's ability to help anyone. Better to maintain access and help who they can than lose everything fighting unwinnable battles. He suggests she focus on her primary mission. Continue excellent work with British prisoners. File proper reports through official channels. Trust that higher authorities will address these concerns after the war when fuller investigations become possible. For now, discretion serves humanitarian interests better than confrontation. Sister Bowes sits in silence after he leaves. Understanding slowly what his careful diplomatic language actually means. No one will act on her evidence. No one will investigate her claims. The notebook is worthless as immediate intervention. At best, it might become post-war evidence. More likely, it will be dismissed as exaggerated, biased, unprovable. But she keeps documenting. Because someone has to. Because Volkov died getting those papers to her. Because 40 men per month are disappearing into unmarked graves. Because silence is complicity and she refuses to be complicit even if she lacks power to prevent what's happening. June arrives hot and oppressive. Sister Bowes requests transfer back to Britain. Officially due to exhaustion and stress. Unofficially because she's become liability to the camp's carefully maintained fiction of proper procedure. The Germans approve immediately. Relieved to remove a troublesome observer. The Red Cross agrees. One fewer diplomatic incident to manage. She has 2 weeks to prepare departure. She uses them to finalize documentation. Adds testimonies from British prisoners willing to go on record after the war. Copies key evidence onto additional pages hidden in different locations. Sews pages into the lining of her coat. Buries copies in sealed containers near the camp perimeter where they might survive if she doesn't. Flight Lieutenant Preston helps her. They work by candlelight in the infirmary after hours, transcribing and copying. Building redundancy into the evidence chain. Insurance against confiscation or destruction. The notebook itself she'll carry openly, disguised as personal journal. Medical notes mixed with daily observations and innocuous personal reflections. The incriminating pages look like ordinary diary entries unless you're reading carefully. Her last night in Stalag VIII-B, she stands at the infirmary window watching the Soviet compound in darkness. Somewhere behind that wire are men dying invisibly, systematically, intentionally. Men whose names she'll never know. Whose faces she's never seen. Whose deaths will be attributed to natural causes and bureaucratic inevitability. But she has their story. Incomplete, imperfect, but real. Documentary evidence that someone witnessed, someone recorded, someone refused to accept the fiction of normalcy. The notebook is her testimony. Her refusal to forget. Her small act of resistance against organized forgetting. When she boards the train out of Lamsdorf on June 30, 1944, she carries 3 kilograms of luggage and 100 grams of evidence that could hang a dozen men. If anyone believes her. If anyone cares. If anyone has the courage to prosecute crimes hidden behind enemy lines during wartime. She doesn't know yet that no one will. London, July 1944. Sister Margaret Bowes reports to Red Cross headquarters in Kensington. Standard debriefing after overseas assignment. She expects bureaucratic routine. File reports, answer questions, receive next assignment. Instead, she brings the notebook. The debriefing officer is polite, professional, exhausted. The Normandy invasion has created massive humanitarian crisis. Thousands of casualties, displaced civilians, damaged infrastructure. Every Red Cross worker is desperately needed elsewhere. The officer thanks Sister Bowes for her service in Germany, takes her official report, begins discussing future assignments. She interrupts. Says she has additional documentation. Evidence of war crimes at Stalag VIII-B, systematic murder of Soviet prisoners disguised as natural deaths. Detailed records, witness testimony, irrefutable proof. The officer's expression shifts from professional courtesy to careful neutrality. He asks if she filed proper reports through established channels. She says she tried. Swiss inspector advised discretion. German officials denied access. She's bringing evidence directly to London because no one else would document what was happening. He reads through the notebook. Takes his time. Pages of dates, numbers, medical observations. Testimony transcribed from Russian. Drawings of violence. Cross-reference documentation showing discrepancies between official records and actual deaths. It's methodical, detailed, damning. When he finishes, he closes the notebook carefully. Returns it to her. Says the Red Cross appreciates her diligence, but this falls outside organizational mandate. Red Cross doesn't investigate war crimes. That's for military authorities and international tribunals. She should take her evidence to proper channels. War Office, perhaps. Foreign Office. Someone with prosecutorial authority. She asks which specific office. Who exactly should she contact? He doesn't know. Suggests she write to her Member of Parliament. Or perhaps wait until the war ends and formal investigations begin. For now, the priority is humanitarian aid to liberated territories. Historical documentation is important but must wait. She leaves headquarters with the notebook still in her possession. No official acknowledgement. No case number. No indication anyone will act on her evidence. Just polite dismissal disguised as bureaucratic guidance. She tries the War Office next. 3 visits over 2 weeks. Each time, she's told to speak with someone else. Different departments, different jurisdictions, different excuses. Soviet prisoners are Soviet responsibility. Britain can't investigate crimes against Russian nationals without Soviet request. Perhaps she should contact Soviet embassy. Or wait for Allied coordination at higher levels. Or file written report that will be reviewed eventually. No one wants the notebook. No one wants responsibility for its contents. Because acknowledging her evidence means acknowledging Allied complicity through inaction. Means admitting they knew about systematic murder and chose diplomatic convenience over intervention. Easier to dismiss her testimony as exaggerated, unreliable, impossible to verify. August 1944. Sister Bowes writes to Soviet embassy. Explains she has documentation of crimes against Soviet prisoners. Requests meeting. Receives no response. Tries again. Still nothing. The Soviets are too busy fighting their way across Eastern Europe to worry about dead prisoners in German camps. Or perhaps they don't want documentation from Western sources that might complicate post-war narratives. She tries members of parliament. Writes letters. Requests meetings. Gets polite acknowledgements. A few sympathetic responses. No action. One MP explains gently that wartime is complicated. Allies can't prosecute German war crimes while fighting Germany. Must maintain unity of purpose. Her documentation is valuable but timing is wrong. After victory, tribunals will be established. Then her evidence will matter. But how many more will die before victory arrives? How many are dying right now in camps across occupied Europe while bureaucrats explain proper procedure? September 1944. Sister Bowes is reassigned to field hospital in France. Normandy campaign casualties need experienced nurses. She accepts. Takes the notebook with her. Continues documenting in gaps between trauma cases and surgical rotations. Different context, same principle. Bear witness. Preserve evidence. Refuse to forget. The field hospital treats everyone. Allied soldiers, German prisoners, French civilians. Everyone bleeds the same. Everyone suffers identically. The notebook grows with new observations. Similarities between British treatment of German prisoners and German treatment of Western prisoners. Both sides generally follow conventions. Both sides maintain some humanity even in combat. But Eastern Front is different. Testimonies from German prisoners confirm what she witnessed at Stalag VIII-B. No quarter given or received. Systematic brutality on both sides. Ideological war where normal rules don't apply. Prisoners treated as subhuman. Mass killings routine. Her documentation from Lamsdorf was an isolated incident but standard practice across entire theater. The Germans say Soviets started it. Soviets say Germans started it. Both sides accumulate evidence of the other's atrocities. Both sides justify retaliation and escalation. Sister Bowes documents everything without choosing sides. Her notebook becomes encyclopedia of mutual atrocity. Proof that war destroys moral categories when nations abandon civilized constraints. December 1944. The field hospital moves forward with advancing Allied lines. Belgian villages, German towns, slowly toward the Rhine. Every kilometer brings fresh evidence. Burned villages. Mass graves. Civilian testimonies about occupation brutality. The notebook fills with locations and dates. Pattern emerging across countries and campaigns. She begins to understand something terrible. Her documentation isn't unique. Thousands of people are witnessing atrocities. Thousands are documenting crimes. Refugees carry testimonies. Prisoners preserve evidence. Resistance fighters maintain records. The problem isn't lack of documentation. The problem is lack of anyone willing to act on documentation during wartime. Everyone's too busy surviving to prosecute. Too busy fighting to pursue justice. The crimes continue because stopping them requires resources nobody can spare while the war continues. Her notebook joins thousands of other notebooks held by thousands of other witnesses. All waiting for peace that hasn't arrived. All hoping someone will eventually care. January 1945. Sister Bowes is 31 years old. She's been documenting war crimes for 10 months. The notebook is thick with evidence nobody wants. British authorities dismissed it. Soviet embassy ignored it. Red Cross advised discretion. Military officials promised eventual tribunals. Everyone agrees crimes are happening. Nobody can stop them. She continues nursing. Continues documenting. Because what else can she do? Silence is complicity. Forgetting is betrayal. The men who died at Stalag VIII-B died believing someone would remember. Volkov handed her those papers believing truth mattered. She can't abandon that faith even when institutions abandon her. The hospital reaches German territory. They begin treating concentration camp survivors liberated from forward areas. The testimonies are worse than anything she's documented. Industrial murder. Scientific extermination. Bureaucratized genocide. Camps designed not just to kill prisoners but to erase them. Gas chambers. Crematoriums. Record-keeping systems tracking humans like inventory. Her notebook seems almost quaint compared to these revelations. Deaths at Stalag VIII-B were crime. These are crime against category itself. Murder beyond comprehension. Evil beyond documentation. She tries to record survivor testimonies. Realizes quickly that her methods are inadequate. Can't capture this in dates and numbers. Can't reduce it to medical observations and procedural discrepancies. The scale defeats documentation. The horror exceeds language. But she tries anyway. Because someone must. Adds pages about concentration camp survivors to pages about POW camps. Creates compendium of wartime atrocity. Comprehensive and useless. Detailed and ignored. She's become archive without audience. Witness without court. Documenting crimes for tribunal that may never convene. April 1945. Germany collapsing. Allied armies converging on Berlin. End approaching faster than anyone expected. Sister Bowes continues working, continues documenting. The notebook is nearly full. 500 pages of testimony, observation, evidence. 10 months of bearing witness to things she couldn't prevent. She knows what will happen when war ends. Nuremberg trials, everyone says. International tribunals. Justice for victims. Prosecution of perpetrators. Her evidence will matter then. Her documentation will find purpose. The crimes she recorded will be acknowledged and punished. She wants to believe that. Needs to believe that. Because if no one acts on this evidence, if no one prosecutes these crimes, then her documentation becomes just another testament to human capacity for organized evil. Just another record of atrocity without consequence. Just proof that bearing witness changes nothing when witnesses lack power. May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe. The war ends. Sister Bowes sits in a liberated German town holding a notebook full of evidence from a camp that no longer exists. Stalag VIII-B was evacuated as Soviet forces approached. Prisoners dispersed. Records destroyed. Guards scattered. The place where she witnessed systematic murder is now empty field in Soviet-occupied territory. She still has the notebook. Has names, dates, testimonies. Has proof of what happened. But the men who gave her that evidence are scattered across Europe or dead. The Germans who committed crimes are hiding or fleeing. The camp itself is behind Iron Curtain where Western authorities can't access it. Her evidence is complete and useless. Detailed and inaccessible. The crimes she documented can't be prosecuted because criminals can't be located and witnesses can't be gathered and crime scenes can't be inspected. The war ended before justice could arrive. She takes the notebook to Nuremberg. October 1945. International Military Tribunal beginning preparation for major trials. She presents her documentation to American prosecutors. They're polite, interested, ultimately dismissive. Soviet crimes against Germans aren't part of tribunal's mandate. German crimes against Soviets are complicated by Soviet non-cooperation. Her evidence about one specific camp is too narrow for major trials and too diffuse for specific prosecutions. They thank her for her efforts. Suggest she publish her account after trials conclude. Historical record valuable even if legal prosecution impossible. But right now, prosecutors are focused on top Nazi leadership. Concentration camps. Holocaust. The big crimes against millions. Individual POW camp atrocities will be addressed later. Maybe. If resources permit. Sister Bowes understands what later means. Means never. Means forgotten. Means 40 men per month died invisibly at Stalag VIII-B and will remain invisible because bigger crimes overshadow smaller ones and limited prosecution resources focus on easier cases. She returns to London with the notebook. December 1945. War's been over 7 months. Everyone wants to forget, move forward, rebuild. The great documentation project has narrowed to major trials of major criminals. Everything else is collateral memory. Historical footnote. Too complicated to prosecute, too minor to matter. The notebook sits in her flat. Evidence without trial. Testimony without verdict. 500 pages of witnessing that witnessed nothing. She thinks about publishing. Writing memoir. Turning documentation into narrative. Giving voice to men who died voiceless. But publishers aren't interested in Soviet POW stories. Market saturated with Holocaust testimonies and liberation narratives. Audience exhausted by atrocity. Prefer triumphant stories about victory and survival. Don't want complicated moral ambiguity about camps nobody's heard of and victims nobody cares about. She's offered book deal if she focuses on her own experience. Makes it personal journey of British nurse rather than documentary evidence of war crimes. Turn it into melodrama with heroic protagonist. Publishers want story about her courage, not documentation about Soviet victims. Want redemption arc, not prosecutorial evidence. She refuses. The notebook isn't about her. Never was. It's about Dmitri Volkov and 40 men per month and systematic murder hidden behind bureaucratic procedure. Making it personal story betrays everyone who died believing truth mattered more than narrative. So the notebook sits unpublished. Unread except by woman who wrote it. Evidence for trial that never happened. Testimony for justice that never arrived. Years pass. Sister Bowes marries, returns to nursing, has children, builds ordinary life. The notebook stays in her desk drawer. Sometimes she opens it. Reads entries from 1944. Remembers names and faces. Wonders what happened to Flight Lieutenant Preston. Wonders if any Soviet prisoners survived. Wonders if anyone else remembers Stalag VIII-B. She contacts Red Cross periodically. Asks about investigations. Always same response. Limited resources. Competing priorities. Perhaps someday when archives open. Perhaps someday when witnesses can be located. Perhaps someday when political climate permits. Perhaps never. 1950s arrive. Cold War hardens. Soviet Union becomes enemy again. Stories about Soviet suffering during war become politically inconvenient. Western governments prefer narratives about democratic allies defeating totalitarian enemies. Complicated truths about Soviet prisoners dying in German camps with Western witnesses watching helplessly don't fit clean categories. The notebook becomes more unmarketable with each passing year. Historical moment closes. Interest fades. The few historians who see it praise its detail but question its utility. Single witness account from one camp, impossible to verify, politically complicated. File it away. Maybe revisit later. Maybe not. Sister Bowes grows old. The notebook grows dusty. The men she documented remain dead and forgotten. The crimes she witnessed remain unprosecuted. The truth she preserved remains preserved but useless. The war ended. Justice didn't arrive. Memory persists without consequence. 1987, Margaret Bowes is 71 years old. She lives in a cottage in Kent. Widowed, retired, largely forgotten. The notebook sits in a cardboard box in her attic. 43 years since she carried it out of Stalag VIII-B. 4 decades of silence. Then a letter arrives. From doctoral student at Cambridge. Young woman named Sarah Mitchell studying POW camps during World War II. She found Margaret's name in old Red Cross records. Listed as nurse stationed at Lamsdorf. Would Mrs. Bowes be willing to discuss her experiences? Academic research, oral history project, contributing to historical understanding. Margaret says yes. Invites Sarah for tea. Brings down the cardboard box. Opens it carefully, arthritis making her fingers stiff. Inside is the notebook. Blue fabric cover faded to gray. Pages yellowed but intact. 500 pages of testimony nobody wanted. Sarah reads through it over 3 visits. Takes notes, asks questions, treats it with the reverence of archaeological discovery. This is primary source documentation, she explains. First-hand witness account. Exactly what historians need. Fills gaps in official records. Provides human perspective on bureaucratic crimes. Has Margaret ever published this? Shared it with archives? Donated it to museum? Margaret explains she tried. Nobody cared then. Doubts anyone cares now. Sarah disagrees. Argues historical climate has changed. Cold War ending. Archives opening. Soviet records becoming accessible. Interest growing in complete narrative of war including uncomfortable chapters. This documentation is valuable now in ways it wasn't in 1945. She asks permission to cite the notebook in her dissertation. Margaret agrees. Doesn't expect much. Academic thesis, limited audience, theoretical importance without practical impact. But it's something. Better than cardboard box in attic. Sarah's dissertation is published in 1991. Becomes minor sensation in academic circles. First detailed documentation of systematic Soviet prisoner maltreatment in Western POW camps based on contemporary witness account. Challenges comfortable narratives about German treatment of prisoners. Complicates understanding of Geneva Convention application. Opens new research directions. Other historians contact Margaret. Request access to notebook. Want to verify citations, examine original. Imperial War Museum asks about donation. National Archives inquires about preservation. Cambridge wants to digitize it. The notebook that nobody wanted for 45 years suddenly becomes sought after primary source. Margaret agrees to donation. Imperial War Museum, she decides. Let it join other testimonies. Let it become part of official record finally. The museum accessioned it in 1993. Conservation team carefully preserves each page. Digitization makes it available to researchers worldwide. Citation Index tracks its use in subsequent scholarship. By 2000, Margaret's notebook appears in 43 academic publications. Forms basis for 3 doctoral dissertations. Referenced in 2 popular histories of World War II. Contributes to revised understanding of POW camp conditions and systematic violations of international law. The evidence she gathered in 1944 finally reaches audience willing to hear it. 56 years late. But no prosecutions result. The men she named as perpetrators are dead. The camp no longer exists. Soviet Union collapsed. New Russian government has neither resources nor interest in pursuing 60-year-old crimes. German government acknowledges historical guilt collectively but doesn't prosecute individuals posthumously. The legal justice Margaret sought never arrives. Instead, there's historical justice. Recognition. Documentation. Memory. The 40 men per month who died at Stalag VIII-B are no longer statistically invisible. They're documented, named where possible, acknowledged in historical record. Dmitri Volkov's testimony reached destination finally. His death wasn't meaningless. Someone remembered. Someone preserved. Someone refused to forget. Margaret Bowes died in 2004, age 87. Obituaries mention her wartime service. Note her contribution to historical documentation. Describe her as witness who never stopped witnessing. The notebook survives her. Sits in climate-controlled archive in London. Available to researchers by appointment. Carefully preserved evidence of crimes never prosecuted but no longer forgotten. Today, military historians reference it when teaching about POW camp conditions. Human rights scholars cite it when discussing documentation of war crimes. Graduate students examine it when researching moral responsibility of witnesses. It has become exactly what Margaret hoped it would be in 1944, proof that someone saw, someone recorded, someone cared. But it's also proof of something she didn't want to acknowledge, that documentation without power changes nothing in present, only in memory. The notebook didn't stop deaths at Stalag VIII-B, didn't prevent atrocities. Didn't bring justice to perpetrators. It merely ensured crimes would be remembered after everyone involved was dead. Is that enough? Margaret struggled with that question her entire life. She documented because she believed truth mattered. Believed evidence would lead to justice. Believed bearing witness served purpose beyond personal conscience. She was wrong about timing. Wrong about justice. Wrong about institutional willingness to prosecute crimes during politically complicated circumstances. But she was right that memory matters. Right that documentation serves future even when it fails present. Right that bearing witness is moral imperative even when witnessing changes nothing immediate. The notebook exists because one woman refused to accept bureaucratic dismissal of mass murder. Refused to pretend normal procedures made systematic killing acceptable. Refused to stay silent when silence would have been easier, safer, more professionally prudent. She documented because documentation was only power she possessed. The only resistance available to witness without authority. 43 years passed between documentation and acknowledgement. Entire generation. Cold War rose and fell. Soviet Union existed and disappeared. The men who died at Stalag VIII-B remained dead. The Germans who killed them remained unpunished. Nothing changed except historical record. Margaret's notebook joined thousands of similar testimonies in archives across Europe and America. Collective memory of atrocity without collective justice for atrocity. But memory isn't nothing. Documentation isn't meaningless. The notebook preserves names that would otherwise be forgotten. Preserves testimony that would otherwise disappear. Preserves truth that official records tried to obscure. That matters. Not as much as justice would matter. Not as much as prevention would matter. But it matters. In 2019, Russian historian visited Imperial War Museum specifically to study Margaret's notebook. He was researching Soviet POW experiences in German camps. Found Margaret's documentation invaluable. Used it to locate surviving records in Russian archives. Cross-referenced her dates with Soviet military records. Identified some of the men she documented. Contacted their families. Gave them information about how their grandfathers died. Gave them closure 75 years late. One family contacted museum afterward. Grandmother had always wondered what happened to her husband after he was captured in 1941. She died in 1986 without knowing. But her granddaughter learned because of Margaret's notebook. Learned he was at Lamsdorf. Learned he died in spring 1944. Learned someone witnessed his suffering. Learned he wasn't forgotten even when he seemed erased. That's the notebook's legacy. Not justice. Not prevention. Just memory. Just testimony. Just one woman's refusal to let organized forgetting succeed completely. The crimes she documented went unpunished. The system that created them wasn't dismantled. But the men who died weren't erased. Their deaths weren't rendered meaningless. Someone remembered. That's what bearing witness means. Not changing present but preserving truth for future. Not preventing atrocity but refusing to pretend it didn't happen. Not achieving justice but maintaining record so justice might become possible later. It's inadequate, insufficient, frustrating. But it's what witnesses can do when they lack power to do more. Margaret Bowes understood that eventually. Took her 40 years but she understood. The notebook wasn't failure because it didn't stop crimes. It was success because it documented crimes when documentation was dangerous and difficult and seemingly pointless. It was resistance in only form available to women with pen and conviction and courage. The Blue Notebook sits in archive. Accessible to researchers. Preserved for future. Evidence of crimes unpunished but documented. Testimony of witness who refused to stay silent. Proof that one person can't change history but can preserve truth within history. That's something. Not everything. Not enough. But something. On quiet afternoons, archivists carefully handle it. Turn pages slowly. Read entries Margaret wrote by candlelight in German POW camp in 1944. The handwriting is small, careful, determined. Each entry a small act of defiance. Each page a refusal to forget. Each date a memorial to men who died believing someone would remember. They're remembered now. Because of notebook nobody believed. Because of nurse nobody listened to. Because of evidence everybody dismissed. 40 men per month at Stalag VIII-B are no longer statistics or abstractions. They're documented. Named where possible. Acknowledged in historical record. Present in collective memory even though absent from historical justice. The war ended 75 years ago. Everyone involved is dead. Perpetrators, victims, witnesses. Only evidence remains. Archives full of notebooks like Margaret's. Testimonies of people who saw and recorded and preserved. Who bore witness when witness was only power they possessed. It's not triumph. Not redemption. Not justice. Just memory persisting when memory seems futile. Just truth preserved when truth seems powerless. Just documentation surviving when everything else disappears. It's what remains when everything else is gone. And sometimes, on quiet afternoons in climate-controlled archives, that's enough. Someone remembered. Someone documented. Someone refused to forget. 40 men per month died at Stalag VIII-B. And 75 years later, we know their names. Because one nurse carried a blue notebook out of occupied Europe and never stopped believing truth mattered even when nobody else cared. That's the legacy. Not the legacy anyone wanted. Not the legacy Margaret hoped for. But the legacy that exists. The legacy we have. The legacy of bearing witness in darkness, preserving truth in silence, and refusing to let organized forgetting succeed completely. The notebook remains. The testimony persists. The memory survives. And somewhere, in quiet space between what should have been and what actually was, that means something. Not everything. But something. And sometimes, something is all we get.